In the Lost World Jurassic Park, there was a bold vision. A second park, not hidden on a remote island, but built right here, in San Diego. A prehistoric zoo in the heart of civilization, where dinosaurs would walk among us, safely, profitably, and publicly. But that dream, it never came true. The plan failed, until now. I gave myself 100 days to bring the dream to life, and build Jurassic Park San Diego. From towering sauropods to the most fearsome predators to ever roam the earth. This was going to be quite the challenge. Can I finally bring John Hammond's vision to life, or will life, as always, find a way to make things difficult? Well, to tell you this story, we're going to have to take you back to day one. On day one, I began by assessing what had been left behind for me to pick up the pieces of. Jurassic Park San Diego had been a vision for quite some time.
Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
But they needed a true dinosaur expert to bring it to life, hence my involvement. I began by placing down a response facility, as we couldn't add in any dinosaurs until we could look after them properly. Of course, I needed to place down a path and link it up to the response, and then I placed an electrical generator to make sure that we had power. As the San Diego site had been inactive for so long, we had a lot of buildings that were in need of repair, so I sent out the response team to do just that. But they were taking their sweet time to sort these issues, so in true CEO fashion, I jumped in one of the Jeeps myself to do some of the repair work, although it turns out these things are a little bit tricky to drive. Once that was done, I needed to recruit some scientists. So after hiring a couple of scientists, I immediately put them to work on researching some improved power technology, as these current generators were not cheap to run. Once they had finalised the research, I placed down a small power station, and while it was building, I placed pylons all around the park and linked them up to substation. Soon our entire park was all powered by our one small power station. But it was not time to rest on our laurels, as now we had the arrival of our first dinosaurs imminent, which meant we were on a crunch to prepare a first exhibit for them. I sent out the response team to repair the damage to the existing enclosures, including the viewing gallery, so that our future guests would be able to admire our brand new dinosaurs, and then went to finish off the enclosure myself by building some new fences, which was all going swimmingly before my ranger team decided to try and sabotage me. I placed down a gate so a ranger team would be able to go through into the enclosure, and we were now ready to receive our first dinosaurs and make this park truly operational. As they were being transported, I added some water into the enclosure and then put down a ranger post where I assigned a ranger team to. And just in time also, as it was time to welcome our first dinosaurs to Jurassic World San Diego, and the chaos could begin. So I had our Pachycephalosauruses delivered into the enclosure that I'd already made for them, and then got my scientists doing some research for some efficiency upgrades also. The Patchies had arrived and San Diego had its first dinosaurs. They seemed to be getting settled in nicely, and once they arrived they were seen by the ranger team, who informed me they needed some ground fibre, so I added that in to help them keep them happy. And to celebrate San Diego having its first dinosaur, my very own dinosaur business decided to throw a massive sale with some crazy discounts on almost everything. For those unaware, Dinosaur World is my very own startup business, ran right out of my home, selling everything dinosaur related to all around the world, apart from to Europe because, well, Brexit. Sorry guys. To celebrate the release of Jurassic World Rebirth, we are throwing a crazy sale to raise funds so that we can get in some of the newer merchandise for you guys. Now is a great time to pick something up either for yourself or a loved one, as these discounts will not last long. We are even throwing in an official Jurassic World bag clip for all orders over £30. All proceeds go towards helping a small startup business and also supporting the channel. I'll put a link on screen now and also in the description of the video, and thank you so much for your time. Let's get back to making San Diego. But I didn't have long before my next arrivals were imminent. First would be the Compsognathus, and as I didn't want any poor innocent children being attacked like at the start of Lost World, I set about making a nice exhibit for them. The Tyrannosaurus Rex, however, were obviously going to be placed in the big San Diego amphitheatre, so I set about enclosing that, which would allow our guests to get a great view of the Tyrant Lizard King. I enclosed the amphitheatre and then delivered our compies to the same exhibit as the Patchies, as apparently these two species were able to coexist peacefully. I then got the call. The Rexes were ready to be transported. So I asked them to be put into the amphitheatre pen, and while I waited on their arrival, I admired the view that our future guests would have of our star attraction. Jurassic Park San Diego was finally being brought to life. Our Rexes had now arrived, and from the moment I set eyes on them, I realised how much our guests would absolutely love them. And also how much our ranger teams were absolutely going to hate them. Once they were in and getting settled in, I realised they were in need of some live prey. So I had to research that as soon as possible, as we did not want any unhappy Rexes rampaging about. Our compies were also here, so I sent out a ranger team to examine them to make sure they had a nice clean bill of health, before returning to the Rexes to place down some nice goats ready for them to feed on, as T-Rex doesn't want to be fed, it wants to hunt. Our Rexes were more or less content now, so I added some sand to really satisfy them, which was actually all our compies also needed to remain happy. With the board of investors happy that the needs of our dinosaurs had been met, they finally gave me the go-ahead to open Jurassic Park San Diego. And as we opened the gates, our guests came flooding in. Finally, after a long time of waiting, InGen's vision of Jurassic Park in San Diego was coming to life. But now was not the time to relax, because normally where dinosaurs and guests go, chaos follows. Now, with some guests through the door, I would have to think about more than just dinosaurs, as these guests would need food, drink, and of course some cuddly dinosaur toys to buy. So down what I would name the main high street, I went about meeting the guest needs, by placing down amenities for all of them. Apparently for some reason they also wanted an emergency shelter, just in case any of our dinosaurs would escape, but of course that was never going to happen. I placed one down anyway though. I also placed down a small hotel, as this would boost our accommodation rating, as who doesn't want to get their 8 hours kip while being watched by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I began to make a new enclosure, as apparently I was soon to welcome some more brand new dinosaurs, and then got my scientists to work on the park tour, so I could throw all my guests into a jeep to get a real close-up view of my dinosaurs. After placing down my staff centre, I hired an additional scientist to help me run Jurassic Park, and then began to prepare the latest exhibit, ready for the arrival of our Parasaurolophuses. I got it ready just in time, and then instructed the transport team to put them in there, and still my building work was not done yet, as apparently we had a sauropod coming in next, and I would need to construct yet another enclosure. It turned out this park CEO life was actually quite a lot of work. And it only got worse, as once these latest arrivals arrived, I quickly realised that we were going to have a bit of an issue, as they were bloody massive. Still though, I had to make sure that they were on view to our guests, so I constructed a viewing area and then set about making sure their needs were met, or trying to at least. Turns out that ginormous sauropods actually need quite a bit of space, who would have thought it, and I was actually getting a bit concerned that we may not have quite enough of it. With the additional dinos added, I needed a second response facility, so I constructed one and put one down, and then had to move the viewing gallery, as the original one was in the way of the park tour that I was just about to construct. After all, you can't have Jurassic Park without your Jeep tour being flipped over by a T-Rex. Quickly put down some more medium amenities to boost that profit and keep the guests happy, and then began to create the route for the park tour. Turns out this was actually a little bit more difficult than I had originally expected, as I ended up having to tear down my paths, fences, and even replace entire water sections in enclosures just to get this park tour off the ground. But I soon had to take a quick break from this, as Jurassic Park San Diego soon suffered from the same fate that all the original parks had suffered from: escaped dinosaurs. So it turns out our new arrivals were not very happy with the lack of space in their new enclosure, so had decided to wander over to the main high street in search of some. I immediately had the fences repaired and a helicopter sent out to tranquilise the rampaging sauropods, and while I let my ranger teams pick up the mess that I had created, I continued to finish my park tour. I clearly had my priorities straight. Eventually though, I was called back by my park rangers, who told me that I still had a mess to clear up, as all our guests were fleeing into the shelters. So I tried to meet the needs of our needy sauropods, and then swiftly got back to working on the park tour, of course, what really mattered. Only to be rudely interrupted again by one of our parasaurs feeling ill. How incredibly selfish. So I had to place down a medical facility to treat the parasaur, and while I let them get back to work on healing my poor sick dinos, I continued my park tour, and also hired another scientist, as I wanted to build an expedition site. An expedition site would allow me to dig for my very own DNA, to create my own dinosaurs here on San Diego, which was all very exciting. What wasn't very exciting, however, was that my park tour was still not complete. I was having a bit of a nightmare trying to finish this thing off, as apparently I was asking the track to curve a little bit too much, but eventually we got there, and finally my little side project had been completed. I placed down some extra pylons and a substation to get some power to the park tour, and my medical team had just got back to me to tell me that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the parasaurs, and I just wasn't providing for their needs enough. Way to show me up, guys. So I added some ground nut to make our parasaurs happy, and soon they were right as rain. I then added a path to our park tour so that our guests could actually access it, and then decided I was going to send off my very first dig team to the US to look for some Triceratops DNA. I'd let my first OG response unit run out of fuel, So I topped that up and then added some bunkers around the park to make guests feel nice and safe and encourage them to come through our entry gates and spend some money.
Give me your money.
I did need to power them though, so I put pylons and substrations around the entire park so that everything would be powered nicely. By this point, my expedition team had come back with the Triceratops DNA, so I immediately got to work on extracting it. At this point, San Diego was coming on pretty nicely, but I needed to keep investing in it to bring it truly to life. So I decided to hire a new top-of-the-range scientist to help out with some of the more challenging research tasks. With a little bit of free time on my hands, I decided it was probably time to extend the enclosure of the Mamenchiasaurus, which, yes, is the name I've been putting off saying this whole time. With a little bit more space, I was hoping that it wouldn't try and escape again in the future. I then witnessed the standoff of all standoffs between my park tour and my sleeping Tyrannosaurus Rex. As I witnessed my sleeping Tyrannosaur take one look at the queue of jeeps and then go back to sleep, I was intensely reminded of the stubborn behaviour my husky Merlin likes to show, so I named this one Merlin. Just as Merlin was trying to get some nice sleep, one of the jeeps decided to be very brave and honk at him. Safe to say, Merlin was not a fan of this. I named the other Rex Marla after my second husky, and then quite enjoyed watching Merlin continue to terrorise the jeeps. After all, who reasonably honks a Tyrannosaur? But even the torn apart jeeps weren't stopping San Diego from posting a positive monthly profit, and with figures like this, I had clearly proven that I was the man for the job. I placed down some more hotels with cracking views of our dinosaurs, as I did want those luxury guests through our door, and then placed down a second power station, as we were beginning to use a fair bit more power now. More guests through the door though meant more amenities, which of course meant more profit, so I was very happy about this as I could then reinvest the money into more dinosaurs. We did need to keep on top of all guest requirements however, so I made sure there were enough restrooms and shelters about the place to keep them happy. Merlin and Marla had stopped attacking the jeeps, and life in Jurassic Park San Diego was going very well. On day 40, it was time to start researching the hatchery, so I'd be able to incubate some dinosaurs of my very own. Also, while I was at it, I decided to do the wide path, as our paths had become rather crowded by this point, causing a few murmurs of discontent amongst our guests. Once the hatchery research had been completed, I placed one down in the corner of our park, and then decided to build an enclosure of it, as another attraction for our guests. I then used our brand new wide paths to sync up the newly constructed viewing area, as well as the hatchery itself to the path, which enabled me to begin creating some Triceratops. While I waited for the eggs to be created, I did a few boring tasks like fill up with fuel, but soon it was time to cook up the eggs. As they cooked, I placed down some water and began to prepare the enclosure for the Triceratops, with some light foliage for them to graze on, but soon it was time to welcome our latest addition to San Diego. With such an iconic dinosaur now added to our park, and only next door to its iconic rival of course the Tyrannosaurus, it was time to buy some more land, so that we could expand Jurassic Park San Diego even more. With people such as Ian Malcolm advising us, what could go wrong? And to fill this space, I was of course going to need some more dinosaurs. So off the expedition team went to Argentina, the home of Lionel Messi, Diego Maradona, but most importantly, the Carnotaurus. However, back at the park we were having some interesting developments. I had been alerted to an incoming dust storm, and it apparently was going to be a bad one. So, learning from those who had failed before me, I decided to open the shelters and essentially shut down the park while the storm raged. We couldn't afford to take any risk this time around, and Jurassic Park San Diego was locked down. While this was happening, I took the opportunity to rest some of my scientists and extract some Carnotaurus DNA. As power stations failed all over the park, thankfully the dust storm didn't seem to be winding up the Rexes too much, although my nerves did start to go up a little bit when Marla woke up from her nap and let out a big roar. But we successfully made it through the night, and the next morning Jurassic Park San Diego was back open for business. Apparently Merlin had managed to contract some sort of illness, probably from swallowing a car door or something, so I sent off the MVU team to scan him and hopefully heal him. I then unlocked heavy fences, as I was pretty sure that these Rexes could actually break through our current fences pretty easily if they really wanted to, and no one wanted that. Back with Merlin, the medical team helped to heal him, and then I refueled a couple of places and placed down some more amenities as our guest count was continuing to grow. With the Carnotaurus DNA now safely secured, it was time to start making an enclosure, and our new heavy fences would make sure that these Carnotaurs were not going to be doing any Houdini escape acts. I placed down a viewing area for our future creatures, and then got to researching some improved power distribution, as we did need to upgrade our electrical systems a little bit. I extended the exhibit of our future Carnotaurs a bit, and then the monthly financials came in, and it was another really successful month for us here in San Diego. I placed down a second viewing area, and then went over to the hatchery to begin the process of creating our Carnotaurs. After beginning that, I began to sort out the enclosure by making sure they had water and some food, and then began to synthesize the eggs. While the last step before we could deliver our exciting brand new asset was being completed, I extracted some apatosaur DNA that my scientists had come back with, as I was already eyeing up this as my next species to be introduced. But the Carnotaurs were now ready to go, and I of course had them airlifted into their new enclosure, as releasing them with the Triceratops, while it might have been good for short-term thrills for the guests, was not going to be a very smart long-term play. I watched the Carnotaurs be delivered and get settled in.
Yeah, we are absolutely cooked, chat. GG.
And quickly I then realised they were missing some sand, so I added that in. And once I did, they were 100% happy with their surroundings. Another brilliant job done by the CEO of San Diego. I continued to watch our Carnos for the rest of the day as they established who was the boss of the pack. The next morning though, it was time to rest some of the scientists, and then hire a brand new one, as I was in need of some better ones myself, and I immediately put Big Brandon to work by asking him to create myself an Apatosaurus, who once was ready I released right away into the enclosure with the Triceratops. The board were clearly super pleased with my performance, and they gave me a chance to purchase even more space for San Diego. I hadn't even really used the existing space that I'd already bought yet, but with the money I had, I thought why not. I already knew in my mind, before I could resign from this highly stressful and dangerous job, I had to achieve the park rating of 5-star, before I went to retire on a beach, sipping cocktails, and never having to deal with a needy apatosaur who wanted more space ever again, which is why I had to extend the Apatosaurus enclosure, by the way. After extending the Triceratops and Apatosaur enclosure, I embraced my greedy billionaire style of me and fired the majority of my scientists. The reality was that due to a sterling reputation of Jurassic Park San Diego, we could now attract far better and more efficient scientists, so I had to be a bit brutal on this one and get the best of the best in. I needed to get some dinosaurs in as well, so I spent a whopping $500,000 to research the dig site for the Suchomimus, but it was one of the rarest and most popular carnivores that I actually had access to, so I figured it was worth the money. One carnivore I already had access to was the Majungasaurus, one of the huge large theropod dinosaurs to deal in cannibalism, so of course I sent out a team to Madagascar to get some fossils. The team swiftly came back and I extracted the DNA, before seeing something rather disturbing. Somehow one of the fences had been broken, and before I knew it there was a rampaging Parasaurolophus running right through my guests. While not quite a T-Rex, escaped dinosaurs were never good for publicity, and today was a very bad day for my Jurassic Park. Determined not to let this happen again, I decided to invest heavily in changing all of my fences over to heavy fences, so that none of these dinosaurs would be able to burst through again. However, I didn't really think this one through. You see, I essentially asked our builders to replace every single fence at once on these enclosures, and turns out that these heavy fences can't just be put up right away. Shocker, I know. This essentially meant that basically every dinosaur for the next day had complete roam of my entire park, and could escape to wherever they liked to. Yes, this even included the Rexes. I did my best to contain the situation as best as I could, but there was no doubt things were getting a bit out of control, and guests were flocking into the emergency shelters like bees to a hive. Things were getting seriously ugly, and the first real test of my leadership was well underway. Thankfully though, Marla didn't seem too interested in escaping, instead deciding to continue smacking into my jeeps.
I tell you what though, folks, that's bloody nice.
In the very corner of my park though, I found an absolute massacre, with 2 dead compies and a dead person, slightly disappointed to have missed this battle of the ages.
I'm dying.
We'll just quickly sweep that one under the rug with our lawyers and move on, shall we? I had the capture teams going out constantly to tranquilise and then move dinosaurs, so I could hopefully restore some form of order to San Diego ASAP. But it had been quite a tiring day, so while I let the park teams clear up the absolute carnage I had created, I retired to the amphitheatre to watch my Rexes have a battle with each other. The only silver lining at this point was that for some reason, they had actually chosen not to escape. After finishing my lunch break, carnage was continuing to break out, but the fence construction was now finally getting there, and hopefully we would not have too much longer to wait until our minor technical malfunctions were all sorted out. As our Majungasaurus DNA was completed, I decided to begin the process of creating some of them, as well as choosing a spot for their enclosure, and beginning to place down some fences. It was a good day in San Diego, and things were going pretty well, and hang on a minute, why is Rampy in a helicopter?
Will you please identify yourself?
Good, don't worry, I'm an experienced pilot.
As the park staff were incredibly slow in responding to my requests, I'm sure it was nothing to do with the carnage that I'd already created of course, I decided to just go and get the job done myself.
It went unbelievably well.
I was tasked with taking a photo of my ill Parasaurolophus to unlock the cure, and I had absolutely smashed it, with some brilliant piloting skills. With my newfound skills mastered, I could now research the medication for rabies, and it was now time to incubate our Majungasaurus eggs, only to realise that I'd burned through all our cash. Whoops. So I'd have to wait a little bit longer before being able to introduce our latest carnivore, as the finances had taken a little bit of a battering, probably something to do with all the escaped dinosaurs. I sent out a team to look for some Coelophysis DNA before placing down some more amenities, as we desperately needed some additional cash to introduce the Majungasauruses. The Coelophysis DNA had now come back, so I had that dealt with, and then turned my attention to some guest attraction upgrades, which would help to get some more guests through the door. I thought I had enough money by this point to release the Majungasaurus, but alas, we were not just quite there yet. So instead, I decided to go back to doing what I did best, placing more pylons and substations around the park, and then placing some more amenities, of course, to up that profit just a little bit more. As we had now researched the guest attraction model, I placed down a cinema to boost guest satisfaction, and then a second attraction which was apparently also a cinema, so I had to do some more research to give me some more guest attraction options. But anyway, the good news was that the Majungos were finally ready to go. I spent all of my money on them, and then right away a dust storm rolled in. Probably not a good combination. As the park finances were so low, this was pretty terrible timing, and I was already going into making a loss, so I could just not afford to close the park for safety reasons. Hopefully history would not repeat itself this time around. The dust storm had wiped my power out, but at least almost all of my enclosures were now heavy fences, and thus the power itself was not actually required for them. I did have to do a little bit more helicopter flying, as one of my dinosaurs had gotten sick and needed another photo of it, so of course I was the man for the job. The park rating though from the dust storm had taken an absolute battering in the last day or so, due to the storm wiping out all the power for my attractions and amenities, and also because the rangers had decided to put the Rexes to sleep, as the dust storm was beginning to agitate them. After a while though, the dust storm had finally cleared, and we could get back to some sort of normality. I filled up with fuel and then turned my attention to the Majungasaurus exhibit, placing down a gate so the park rangers could access them, and then making sure they had plenty of prey, and of course water to keep them content. We were now finally ready to release our latest edition, so I got the helicopters in and asked them to transfer the Majungasaurus to their new home. These cannibals from Madagascar would immediately be one of the most popular dinosaurs here at San Diego, and the new attraction would, at least in the short term, bring in some more guests. Of course, they would have to replace the guests first that Merlin was scaring off, as I found my helicopter team constantly circling my Rexes. I watched my Majungasaurus battle for supremacy as they got settled into their new home, and then researched the widest path possible, as apparently my guests were getting fed up with some of the overcrowded paths, even after I'd already made them any wider. While my research team began that, the first batch of Coelophysis eggs were ready to incubate, so I immediately got my staff to incubate all 10 of them, and once the path research was complete, I replaced all my overcrowded paths with nice wide ones, so that my guests had no reason to complain anymore. The Coelophyses were ready to go, and these critters just love everything and everyone apparently, so I banged them in with the Triceratops and the Apatosaurs. We were now able to research some advanced power technology, allowing us to build bigger power stations, and as San Diego was now using a hell of a lot of power, I immediately decided this would be a good thing to do. I then checked on Merlin, and don't worry, he's not dead, he's just knocked out here, after trying to eat another guest Jeep. This boy was some serious trouble. I then received word from the board that I had officially completed my mission, and had been given the job of San Diego CEO full-time. What they didn't realise, of course, was that as soon as I got this park to 5-star, I was off to go sit on the sunbed, as far away from this inevitable disaster as humanly possible. So we had some work to do to earn that last star, especially as we did only have limited species on offer to us. For some reason, the likes of the Mosasaur and the Spinosaur were off limits here in San Diego, so I just had to work with what I had. I did decide though, after being given the job full time, to take a moment to appreciate what we had built here at San Diego. Truly, we had managed to bring the dream of dinosaurs on the mainland to life, and people were flocking in just to get a sight of our creatures, and to ride that famous park tour of course. But there was no rest for the wicked, and I had to get back to work, and the first thing I did was make one of these lovely large power stations, just to boost our power output up a little bit. My scientists were a little bit disgruntled at how hard I'd been making them work, so I sent them off to the Maldives for a day or so to recover, as I didn't want any Dennis Nedry style sabotage happening here. I then chose a new contract, opting to send out a new expedition team, as I was basically going to be doing that anyway, and it was free money. While I waited for the scientists to return from holiday, I watched Merlin and Marla continue to absolutely terrorise our guests in the jeeps. Unless these guests were signing their life away right before entering our park tour, I have no idea why we haven't been sued yet. The scientists returned from the Maldives, and I immediately sent them off to Niger to get some Suchomimus DNA, which after the Rex was the largest carnivore that San Diego could have, meaning that I would really need this one to help with my goal of a 5-star park. I had finally ran out of room in the original space of the San Diego park, so it was time to expand the park a little bit in terms of both empty enclosures that would hopefully soon house dinosaurs, and also new pathways for the guests to explore, as soon as we would hopefully have some new attractions there. Of course, this meant that I would also need to place new restrooms and shelters to keep all the guests happy, but that was a small price to pay. The Suco DNA came back, and I immediately extracted it before placing down a few more amenities to increase our profit. On day 80, I decided it was time for a little bit of fun, and time for a second park tour route. I had a bit more experience creating these things now, so I wasn't making quite as much of an issue this time around. I decided to build the park tour all around the remaining barren areas of our map, as while there weren't many dinosaurs our guests could actually see there yet, soon they would hopefully be filled with various creatures of all shapes and sizes. Soon our park tour was completed and ready to go, and I immediately turned my attention to creating some Suchomimuses, which were going to be pretty expensive. Before I could incubate the eggs though, I hired a new scientist who was pretty great, and then came back to see that they were going to charge me a whopping 6.2 million for 4 Suchomimuses. Turns out dinosaurs are not very cheap. Still though, I didn't really have a choice, so I reluctantly decided to incubate the eggs. I already had an enclosure ready for them, which of course my brand new park tour ran right through, but even after our new attraction, we were going to need some more dinosaurs, and let's just say I had one in mind, so I began to create another enclosure far away from where the guests were. The next morning on day 85, I was spending some time chilling with my Carnos when the financial report came in, and we were really struggling to get this 5th star. I knew that we needed more dinosaurs, but with the limited dinosaurs available to me, it was turning into a little bit of a struggle. Apparently people had got bored of Merlin and Marla the Tyrannosaurs already, and we needed that X factor. Anyway, after asking the transport team to place the Suchomimuses into their new enclosure, I had to research the piscivore feeder so that my new creatures had something to actually eat. But the DNA had come back for an absolute classic creature that I've been holding out on for quite some time due to safety concerns: the Velociraptor. This iconic dinosaur would certainly bring the fear factor for my guests, which was just what I was after. Although I didn't quite get enough DNA first time around, so I did have to send the team back out to Mongolia to gather some more. And while they did that, our latest attraction was being delivered, and I watched our Suchomimuses being delivered, and my god, they looked fantastic. We may not be able to get Spinosaurus in San Diego, but our 4 Suchomimuses were going to be fantastic for our park rating and revenue. At least, that was what I thought. The immediate impact of their arrival was actually pretty small. That 5-star rating was still over half a star off, so I immediately put my remaining cash balance to good work and began to synthesize some raptor eggs. The first batch, however, were incredibly disappointing, as we only ended up with 2 measly raptor eggs. Not sure what my scientists were cooking there. Still, 2 was better than none, so I instructed for both of them to be incubated. From one Jurassic Park classic dinosaur to the next, on my radar next was the Dilophosaurus, so I sent out a dig team to gather some DNA, and then filled up on fuel, as I seemed to be constantly running out of it. The raptors were ready to be delivered, and after a long day at San Diego, I may have accidentally asked for one of the raptors to be put inside the Suchomimus exhibit, instead of the empty pen next door. I had to wait for the transport team to move the raptor, so I quickly extracted the dialer DNA, and then got in a helicopter myself, as this was my mess, and I was going to fix it myself. I steadied myself right above the Sucho exhibit, and waited for the poor raptor to be delivered. I had spent $300,000 on this asset, and I was not going to allow it to be live bait. Luckily, I had learnt now, as well as an amazing helicopter pilot, I was actually pretty handy with a trank gun, and landed 2 clean hits on the raptor. Catastrophe averted, and I asked the transport team to move the raptor into the right enclosure. After our first batch was so disappointing though, I did decide to incubate another batch of raptor eggs, and these ones led to a much higher amount of raptors, which I was very happy about, as we were now going to have a big pack of 8 raptors. What can go wrong? Unfortunately, my scientists were about to go on strike, so I had to pay to rest them and send them to the Maldives again, and then make sure the raptors' enclosure was nice and comfortable for them, adding in some water and prey for them to hunt. They soon arrived, and I watched them getting settled in to make sure all their needs had been met. And as we were getting so close to that 5th star now, I could not afford any raptors getting on the loose, or we would suffer a major setback. As these raptors were the original ones from Isla Sorna 1997, they also had that beautiful tiger-like stripe on them. Even adding our raptors in though, the star rating was still ticking up incredibly slowly, so I was going to have to really think outside the box for this one. I added some zip lines to go over our most popular enclosures, which would appeal to our adventure-seeking guests. Once placed down, I had a great fly over the Rex enclosure to witness Merlin and Marla doing what they do best. Not quite sure about the legal side of this, but my replacements can solve that. I was so pleased with my zipline experience that I decided to place them all over the park, so the guests could see pretty much all of our dinosaurs from a bird's eye view. I then checked in on our latest attractions, which were the Dilophosaurs, who had been introduced in the middle of a dust storm, which was not ideal for many reasons, but the power outage was damaging my star rating for one. I simply was just not allowed a break at this point. It was now past day 90, and I knew there was only going to be one way that I could get over the line of reaching that 5-star park and getting on holiday. More dinosaur species. First was the Chungkingosaurus, a species of stegosaur that would help to add a little bit more variety to our dinosaur species. I began to synthesize the eggs, and while this species would be enjoyed by our guests, their appeal rating was still relatively low, so I knew I needed something bigger. And it didn't get much bigger than the Apatosaurus. Of course, we did already have a couple of these, so I just released a couple more into the Trikes enclosure. What could go wrong? But still we didn't get to that 5-star, until I finally realised what I needed to do. We needed more Rexes. Merlin and Marla, our Rexes, had by far the biggest appeal rating of any of the dinosaurs we had, and so we needed to introduce some more. They were not cheap by any means. Both the expedition cost and synthesizing of them took a lot of money, but soon we had 2 extra Rexes ready to go. I asked for our Rexes to be transported into the same enclosure as Merlin and Marla, and while they got settled in, I also sorted some Myosaurs quickly for the species variety. In truth though, they weren't needed. The Rexes had done the job, and we had finally achieved our goal and made Jurassic Park San Diego a 5-star park just before our 100-day goal was over. Jurassic Park San Diego had not only been created, but had proven to be a success. The park had reached 5-star, and my job was done. It was time to leave this dinosaur paradise before, as always, life found a way to ruin it. I hope you've all enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave a like if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. If you want early access to all my videos, guys, plus more perks, consider becoming a YouTube member, and I will see you guys in the next one.